The candidate we have today was specifically targeting a role at Amazon, but really they were looking at a handful of positions across big tech. This candidate is seeking a role as a senior program manager, and the leadership principle that I will be targeting is bias for action. The specific question that I asked was, tell me about a time that you sought to beg for forgiveness rather than seek permission. As always with these interview videos, what I will do is play back the mock interview that happened in its entirety. These are real interviews with real candidates who came to me looking for help as they prepared on their interview preparation journey. I will jump in from time to time to add some commentary and feedback overlay on top of the videos. But for now, here are a few things for you to think about as you watch this video. First, it is 100% possible to have a great story selection and even tell a good story, but fail to connect to the core question being asked. See if the candidate does that here. The second thing to think about, and this happens a lot with candidates, is you're so just ready to tell your whole story when the interviewer, me, asks the question. You spill it all out in one shot. You give it all you got. The problem that happens is that you've given up so much of the content, you don't have anything left for the follow-up questions. So what I want you to look for here is whether or not the quality degrades noticeably of the answers as the candidate progresses through the follow-up questions. And finally, look, week after week, we're gonna do this every week until this gets better. Metrics and data to support your claims. Super important, but it's not just about, oh, I have metrics and look at how cool I am. That's not what it's about, right? It's really important that you as a candidate are matching the scope and scale expectations of the company you're targeting, but sometimes you can't match. Like if you're coming from a small company, you're not necessarily gonna ever have the background and experience of some place like Amazon, right? But you can demonstrate by showing that you took on more than was expected for a company of that size, more than was expected for a role at that level, right? The reason metrics and data help is because it helps set the context of where you were relative to the world around you. And are you exceeding those expectations? Are you demonstrating growth potential? Are you showing that you can operate in bigger and bigger areas? That's, especially in interviews for kind of the mid-career folks, super critical to helping you stand out as a candidate. Shift to another question. And in this specific scenario, I want you to walk me through a task, project, whatever, but a deliverable, where you ultimately decided to make a decision instead of asking someone, should I do this? So in essence, that you created a situation where you would have to beg for forgiveness instead of asking for permission. What was it, and what did you do? What was the situation? What did you do?
Okay, it was the COVID started around February in Turkey, and then it came here around April in Tashkent. And at that time, the company that we were working together said that let's go home and let's close the work for a while, and then we are going to see how we are going to move forward.
I am 100% aware that this gentleman's accent is thick. It's true. I get customers from all over the world. And this is the reality. The reason I left this kind of unaffected is so that you as a candidate, if you are not a native English speaker or you are not from the US and you're targeting roles in the United States and you're interviewing for roles in the United States, in the time of video-based interviews where we're talking through a camera, to Amazon, it's gonna be Chime, maybe Zoom, Teams, whatever, the audio quality matters a lot. And what you may not realize is what you sound like on the other end of the microphone when you're having the conversation. So just as a preparation step, right? This is a key factor here. As a preparation step for you, try to get a recording of you in a meeting using the tech, preferably the tech you're going to use in the interview, but if not, just any, so you understand what you sound like on the other side. Microphones matter. Acoustics of the room matter. The platform that you're using matters. All of these things matter, and you'd be surprised what you hear on the other end.
And at that term, in the end of the first week, the CEO of the company called me and said, how are you? Is everything okay? I just wanted to be sure that all is fine. And I said, okay, everything is fine. We are good. There is no problem. We are just waiting. And then he said, we are working with the hospital. We are just building a hospital because the president ordered to finish one of the places as a hospital. We just converted it. So we are working on that. So at that moment, I just said, if you need help, we can support. No problem. We are just 50 people here, engineers, architects. So we can help. I know that there is a risk. I know that it is COVID and it is already starting here and it is risky, but we can help. If some people are working there, we can work too, no problem. And luckily, or I don't know how to phrase this, but in my opinion, it's luckily, I didn't ask to my superior about this. I just said, we can move on. So they accepted the offer and we started working in the hospital. And we were the only foreign team that were working in the hospital, apart from the local people. We worked on the quality part of the quality control part of it and the design management part of it.
Hold
And
on, before you go
so
forward, just I want to clarify. You said the CEO of your business called you, or the CEO of a client called you?
CEO of the client called.
Got it. Okay, I missed that part. Okay, keep going.
Okay,
Sorry.
no, sorry. No problem. So we started working on the site. It was nearly a 1 month job because the president has to open a place to make all the community to calm down. We are taking care of this. Everything is good. We are opening hospitals and blah, blah. So that was the case. And as we are giving this consultancy service to a government-backed up company behind the door, so it has to be finished. There was no gap if we couldn't finish. It has to be opened. So we were the only team, only foreign team that was working on site with the local guys. And I get so much rejection from my management, from my own company's management, because it was a big risk, but we take all the precautions that could be taken at the time. We were just wearing 2, 3 masks and we were just staying in different containers and so on. Long story short, the hospital opened, the president came, they opened, and we were on the opening ceremony with the local guys. And we received a document saying this company is the company who backed us up in the hardest time of the COVID with opening this hospital. So we are grateful. And this company and us will be working all the time after this. So it was a great success as a result. We were honored in the level of the highest part of the government.
There's a few things that I really like about this story. And, you know, depending on when this video is found, right, we're still close enough to COVID that everyone understands what and remembers what the front end of COVID was like. But this is, you know, a hospital situation at the very front end of COVID, a lot of risk. If there's a nit that I would poke at this part of the answer is the candidate was clear that he made a decision. He said, yes, we can help you. We've got people on the ground. Great. That's great bias for action. Love it. But it wasn't clear what was at risk. It wasn't clear, you know, what his management would disagree with. It wasn't clear why they would have a problem with this and potentially what could go wrong if he was wrong in making this decision. And the thing that I talk about all the time is understanding the difference between one-way and two-way doors. Committing a team of 50 people in a foreign country on the ground at the front end of COVID when you've got a lot of unknowns around what COVID was and what it could do to people, affecting people, that's something of a one-way door. So it's a pretty big risk. Big risk to make this decision on his own without asking for permission. So we can infer the risks, but there might be background here around what because they're a contractor that's been building these buildings, specifically hospitals, what protocols have been put in place, et cetera. So there's an opportunity here to really make this answer a bit more rich and full. It's not a red flag. It's not a knock against the candidate. I'm just trying to highlight an area where this answer could have been made even better on top of what he had already provided.
It was just phone call and this happened.
So I just want to understand a little bit more. I get the action that you took and the not asking your manager or leadership team. You just said, we're going to do it. I get that. I understand that. But what I didn't hear was, other than grief that they were providing via email, phone calls, or whatever, what do you, in your mind, when you were making the decision, what did you believe the penalty might have been had they discovered that you did this without asking?
There were two sides of the coin, and one of the parts was I was going to be fired. And the other part was if this thing worked really well, which it did, we will be the only guys who will be working in this country for at least 5 to 10 years in the future. So it was a risk, but it was a risk that personally I know that I could manage. At first, I believed in what I could do, what I can do. I believe in my team because we were working together, and I know them by person, all of them. So I know their qualification, what they can do, what they are afraid of. So that was the decision, and I'm really happy that it worked good.
This might actually be a case where English as a second, third, or fourth language is getting in the way of the candidate being able to effectively communicate what was going on. It was a reasonable assessment of the risks. The stakes certainly could potentially be high. What is missing from this, from the candidate point of view, right? Just what he did. He's just not doing a great job of outlining the potential issues, right? Quantify it, even qualitative analysis, but just the risks were high. It's a little too surface, too high level, too non-specific, and that is an expectation of more junior employees, and certainly not a way to stand out if you're targeting kind of that L6 or just senior program manager layer where you're going to have pretty good scope, not massive scope, but pretty good scope. You're going to need to be able to be in the weeds a bit more and dive deep into the details, and that just wasn't quite here. But again, it's unclear if this was a function of English as second, third, fourth language or not. Broadly, this candidate did actually quite well throughout the interview, and I think it's more aligned with the language being a barrier. But just to highlight this for you as a candidate who might be watching this, wonder if that's a good answer. It wasn't. It could be better. What information did you have at the time when this client CEO called and asked you to make a decision?
He
What
didn't ask
information
a
did you?
decision.
Huh?
He didn't ask anything.
He didn't
I
ask
offered.
anything. He said he needed help and you offered help. I get that. I get it. But what information did you have that led you to believe that this was the right course of action?
Because I know that at that time I knew that all the other companies was trying to find a way to escape from this country. Everyone was trying to leave, and the reason that he was calling me is, of course, he wanted to ask me how I am and how my people are, but also he wanted to hear if we can offer something in the day that he really needed that.
I started the interview or the video with point number 3, which is metrics data. Reasonable questions I might ask as an interviewer who was talking to this candidate that he didn't answer for me. How big a project was this? What was the size in terms of contract value? Total building value plus total contract value to the company. What percentage of, what I'm trying to get is what percentage of the total revenue did this represent to the company, his company, the candidate's company, as well as a percentage of the overall cost of the building? How important was this decision to the hospital person who called him? He said he had 50 people on the ground. Okay, of a team of how many? How big is that normally? What does that look like relative to a team that would stay? What was the original timeline that was put in place, and did they hit that timeline, right? Or were they ahead of timeline, behind timeline? Especially given that everybody was fleeing the country. How many other companies fled the job site? If he knew this, maybe he knows this, maybe he doesn't. But these are things that would be helpful. Metrics aren't just about having a single quantifiable thing that makes it look like, oh, I'm data intensive or I'm data focused. It's about being able to tell a complete story, showing that you understand how to look around the corners and figure out what's important relative to not just your job, but everyone else's job and the business in general to then land your points. As with all these videos, I like to now jump to the end and read the assessment I would have read into the room for this candidate had I been on the hiring loop. And for bias for action, I wrote, candidate demonstrated reasonable bias for action, but the answer needed to be pulled out of the candidate to get clarity on what the decision actually was and what would have been at risk within the org. The candidate could have done a better job of structuring the story, content, and being clear about the risks and the magnitude of the downside of those risks. From the actions taken, the candidate demonstrated high customer obsession as well. This last point I want to highlight. When you're telling your stories in your interview, don't be so myopically focused on the leadership principle that you have in front of you. Just because you've correctly identified it as bias for action doesn't mean in the context of telling that story, in the process of relating some amount of information, that you can't tag your story with additional little bits that demonstrate other leadership principles, right? The job of the interview is, can you do the job? Can you do this role at this company and exceed expectations, right? In doing that, you want to communicate with the person on the other side of the interview, the table, the camera, whatever, that you're a good person to work with and you can get the job done. But in the interview itself, you're communicating how you work, how you do your job, right? And so to the extent that you can expand out beyond just the core leadership principle that you're targeting with your story and tag it with all these other pieces of goodness that show that you're awesome, do that. And what came through loud and clear in this story wasn't just that the candidate had good bias for action, but super customer focused, right? Yes, yeah, whatever. He wasn't even calling me, asking me to do something. I said, what can I do for you? Super customer obsessed. That's great. That's what you want to see, because I, as the interviewer, want to be able to advocate for you come the assessment meeting when we all sit down and we discuss you as the candidate. And if I'm only able to talk about the one thing that I was told to focus on, bias for action, well, my ability to advocate for you is quite low. But if I can say, well, on top of bias for action, the candidate showed great customer obsession and ability to dive deep. He didn't, right? Because he didn't provide the details, but ability to dive deep, really had the numbers. Look, this is a well-rounded candidate. Love talking to this person. That's a likely outcome. In this case, it was the totality interview, great interview, really liked the candidate. Didn't love the candidate, but that's only because there were some things that were missing that the candidate, unfortunately, could have included but didn't. And that's kind of the takeaway for you, which is you have the opportunity to drive the conversation. In your situation, task, action, role, your STAR format, walk it through. The reason I talk about STAR FAQ and using the FAQ on top of STAR is you know what questions you should answer to make sure you tell the whole story. And in doing that, you have the ability to flex a little bit and add other leadership principles as well.